Let's start with the premise. Sort of two things. There's the application side and there's the finance side. So let's start with the application side. So the premise is the often observed remark that the larger the training model, the better the model seems to be in its performance. So one open question, I think the DeepSeek really framed this question well, is whether there are specific and narrow applications that don't require a general model. So they're 97% as good, but much less expensive to develop. And again, coding assistance is probably the use case for a narrow training data set. Many chatbots for narrow purposes are like this as well. Like a legal chatbot doesn't need to read Shakespeare. It just has to read legal documents. So an interesting open question is whether the value of pushing out the size of the model will come up against competition from these much more narrow applications, and the narrow applications will generate a substantial part of the value or not. There's a reasonable open question if you were thinking 3 to 5 years out. So that's one. So that's just to think about the uncertainty. The second thing has to do with who's financing the build out. So you look at who's doing the build out. Most of the build out today comes from the big seven, and really only 5 of the big 7. So let's just name them: Amazon and AWS, Google and Google Cloud, Microsoft and Microsoft Azure, Facebook and the Facebook models. Oops, and I'm missing one. Oh, and OpenAI. Those 5 principally account for most of the data centers that are being built. They're not the only ones, to be fair about it. There are some other independent data centers that are also being built for independent models, but those 5 are where the big investments are coming. And those 5 all have different motive. So Google clearly is doing this to help its already existing businesses and potentially develop a new one. That's also true for Amazon. And it's already apparent there's a payoff there. Having a better LLM helps you do a better match of user to advertising, for example, or helps you do a better search across the internet. Microsoft arguably has that incentive, but also has other incentives coming from its partnership with OpenAI. And OpenAI, unlike the others, is completely new business. So they're just looking to generate revenue in the future. So then you look at that and you ask, how's that being financed? So some fraction of that is coming from the existing firms using their own internal financing. So Google, Amazon are both using internal financing. They have a lot of cash. Same for Facebook. OpenAI is doing it through partnership and also raising debt financing. And the debt financing is the stuff that we're mostly scared about. That's where you tend to get a downside from a bubble. So if you don't get the revenue generated that was promised, then the debt can't be paid off 5 years from now or 3 years from now or whatever it's going to be. So if you look at some of these deals, the firms that are building some of the data centers, are depending on their customers down the line, paying them back in revenue. Now, some parts of these data center deals, if you get into the weeds a little bit here, a data center actually has a really interesting sort of cost structure to it. It has a big upfront cost affiliated with the building and the initial purchases of the racks and the servers. And then it's got an ongoing expense having to do with replacing your servers so they're closer to the frontier, and also using a lot of electricity in order to run your air conditioning and so on. So the cost structure is a lot of upfront cost and then actually fairly substantial costs on a regular basis over several years. So the upfront costs are largely being paid off right at the start. So that's not going to create our, bubble problems. If we're going to get into bubble problems, it's that these very large data centers are going to cost billions of dollars to operate, and in a real-time way need to generate billions of dollars of revenue to pay off the operating expense, make money above that operating expense to pay back the debt and get us back to a place that's whole. I think for most of us who've looked, getting to the bottom line, if you look at the debt financing, I think many of us who look at this I have to say, I'm skeptical that there's going to be enough revenue to pay back the kinds of expenses that we're now seeing. That implies somebody is going to lose money. I can't tell you who, What makes it sort of interesting is there are different players. They have different incentives. Google isn't as worried about losing money if they retain revenue. OpenAI is much more worried about losing money because then they can't pay back things. They're facing a different set of constraints. I didn't mention Oracle. They're building out a bunch of data centers, partly for their own business, which is a cloud business, and partly also for others. That's again sort of this mixed incentive, both new business and old. So that makes this a very interesting example. Who's going to be left who spent too much money and didn't get the revenue in return? That's a kind of a hard call right now. Who would you guess? There's risk sort of being shared by all of them. That's kind of the way it looks to me right now. So when I get asked, is this a bubble? My answer is yes. If your definition of a bubble is, will everybody get their money back? And I think the answer to that is no. If your definition of a bubble is, will nobody get their money back? Well, I'm not sure we're in that territory.